Greetings and welcome to Walden's Pond on this June 10th, 2007. I'm Shelton Walden, your host and producer of Walden's Pond, the weekly radio program that heads you every Sunday, 1 to 2 o'clock here on WBAI 99.5 FM in New York. We discuss health, culture, and politics, and so much more. And this afternoon, you'll be hearing a special interview. In the history of our country, there's only been 5 senators who were African American, 3 of them who have served in the last century, and 2 of them who have served in the last 15 years. We'll be talking with one of the 5 this afternoon. You'll be hearing an interview I did with that person. His name is Senator Edward W. Brooke, former senator from the state of Massachusetts, a Republican senator who served from 1966 to 1978 in the U.S. Senate. He has his autobiography is out entitled Bridging the Divide, My Life by Senator Edward W. Brooke. That and so much more on this edition of Walden's Pond. By all means, stay tuned. 1 o'clock here on WBAI 99.5 FM in New York. Shelton Walden here, your host. Good afternoon to you. Good to be here with you on this overcast day in New York, day of the Puerto Rican Day Parade. Lots of activity on the highways and byways, particularly Fifth Avenue here in Manhattan. Hope you enjoy the day and get out and enjoy this holiday, this Sunday in New York. Hope you enjoyed last week's program. We were happy to talk with longtime consumer activist and 2-time presidential candidate Ralph Nader was here last week and had a lively discussion about politics 2008. And his documentary, if you haven't seen it, An Unreasonable Man, fine documentary on the life and times of Mr. Ralph Nader. As I mentioned at the top of the show, we'll be talking, and this is one of my political heroes, Senator Edward W. Brooke. He's a former Republican senator from the state of Massachusetts who served in the U.S. Senate. He was the first popularly elected African-American U.S. senator, first African-American to serve at that time in more than 90 years when he was elected back in 1966 to the state of Massachusetts. And he served with distinction. He served with honor and was a pioneer and trailblazer for many politicians after him. He was defeated in for his attempt for a third term to the U.S. Senate back in 1978 to Senator Paul Saunders, the late Senator Paul Saunders, during a very public, his divorce. Senator Brooks' divorce was a big issue in that campaign, and he lost his seat in part because of that. Since then, he has forged a life out of the public eye for the most part. He's been active in a number of causes, a number of good causes. He also remarried and has a grown son. He also suffered from breast cancer 5 years ago and overcame that as well. And it was a privilege to talk with him a short time ago about his life. And particularly, I urge you to read his book called Bridging the Divide by Senator Edward W. Brooke. It's autobiography written very late in his life, if you will, but it talks about his childhood, living under Jim Crow in Washington, D.C., his service in the military, of course, and his various attempts at political offices, and his views on the current political candidates and the current political climate. So I hope you enjoyed this interview with Senator Edward, with Senator Brooke. Again, it was just a joy to talk with him and an honor to talk with him a short time ago. So, again, Senator Edward W. Brooke, we start out the conversation with Senator Brooke by discussing, again, it's he waited a long time to write his autobiography, and he said that people had urged him over the years to write it, but he felt that he had a lot more living to do. But he started to write it, and he wrote it, and it's out there. It's called Bridging the Divide by former U.S. Senator from Massachusetts, Senator Edward W. Brooke. This is Walden's Pod. I'm Shelton Walden, and we're on WBAI 99.5 FM in New York.
After my defeat in 1979, of course, many publishers were interested in the book, but I wasn't ready. I didn't think my life was by any means over, and it wasn't. And so I've sort of had a second go around at life, and it's been a very rewarding period in my life. I've remarried, and I have a son, or we have a son. And he's now a man. And, I've served on commissions appointed by the President and by the Senate. And it's been an active life. I've practiced law. I've lived on a farm. I've done many interesting things, at least interesting to me.
Right.
And my wife wanted me to write it, as did my former staff members. And they kept after me. And I decided, well, why not? Why not sit down and write it, and it is a frank and honest report, so to speak, to the public of my life from birth, and I'm still living. So
yes, absolutely. Did you ever thought about writing a book before this?
I had thought about it. I did not keep a diary. I never really quite anticipated that I would have the discipline to do this, because it entails a lot of research, a lot of conversations with members of your family who are still living, members of your staff, overviewing your legislative endeavors, and I just came to the conclusion that now was the time, and I think I'm correct in that, because the reception to the book has been very favorable. I'm very pleased.
You grew up in Washington, D.C. at a time when Washington, D.C. was segregated and under Jim Crow. Explain a little bit about your upbringing, please.
Well, first of all, Sheldon, my grandfather was a slave and lived on a plantation in Virginia, which was called the Brooke Plantation, and during those days, slaves took the names of the slave owners, and so he took the name Edward William Brooke, which name I carry for the third time. And he moved to Washington, D.C. He took his family there and was a trainman on the Pennsylvania Railroad. And you're absolutely right, the nation's capital was segregated. They had toilets for whites and toilets for, at those days they called them Negroes or Coloreds, and you couldn't cross that barrier line. You couldn't go downtown to the theaters. You couldn't go to the department stores. Our women could not try on hats. We couldn't sit at a 5 and 10 cent store counter and get a hot dog. Sometimes they'd let you carry out, but you certainly couldn't sit in any kind of an integrated community in Washington, D.C. It was flagrant separation, segregation, and discrimination, and I came up living in a cocoon with our parents, those who were fortunate enough to have some education, were able to provide things that their children could not get there. So, I felt the sting of segregation but I never felt it more than I did when I went into the Army in World War II.
Yeah, I want to talk about that. That's really something. Your father, your parents, your father in particular was a Republican, and you say in your book that he was a very distinguished man, but he also was a very embittered man at the because of racism. A lot of promotions were denied him.
Well, that's absolutely right. My father went to Howard University Law School and got his degree. He took the bar, but he didn't pass it. He became a government lawyer, worked for the Veterans Administration in a legal capacity.
Mm-hmm.
But my father was bitter, Sheldon. He certainly was, and as were a lot of Negro men of his era.
Mm-hmm.
They could not get good jobs. They were often working for wages far below those that were given to white employees. He couldn't get promotions, and a lot of them even turned to drink, as did my father, because they were so discouraged, so downtrodden, that they began to feel that they had lost their manhood or really their human souls. So I came up witnessing that. It was a sad occasion for them. It was a sad occasion for their children. I was one of the fortunate ones to go to a good high school, Dunbar High School.
Yes.
Fortunate because the teachers there had gotten master's degrees and doctorate degrees from some of the most prestigious universities in the country. But they couldn't work in those universities. They couldn't teach elsewhere, and possibly in Negro colleges, which couldn't pay them really a livelihood that they really had justified in obtaining.
Mm.
So they taught at Dunbar High School, and the students at Dunbar High School were being taught, as I said, by teachers with master's degrees and doctorate degrees, and they went on to do exceptional things in many different fields of endeavor.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You were close to your mom, and you said that she had a very independent, objective mind in a lot of ways.
She did. She was a wonderful woman. I don't think she had a great deal of education. She may have finished high school, which in those days was pretty good for a Negro woman. And Negro women, of course, like all women in those days, could not even work outside the home. It was a disgrace if they had a job outside, and they were taking jobs from the mouths of starving children, which was, of course, ridiculous, and a lot of changes since that time. But my mother was independent-minded, and she told me to keep fighting. I could do anything that I wanted to do. She took me to New York to see opera, Carmen and Cavalier de Rusticana. And in those days, we certainly could not go downtown to see any opera or even a movie. And so she introduced me to the world of opera, which I have stayed with for some time, and even to today in Miami. But I chaired the Boston Opera Company in Massachusetts and Boston, and it was sort of different for an African American to be in opera at that time. But she introduced me to that. But she introduced me to so many things, and she gave me confidence in myself and helped me get a spiritual basis, because she insisted that I go to Sunday school and to church, and so I came up in a loving, religious, somewhat aggressive family, due primarily to my mother.
Talking with Senator Edward Brooke, former senator from Massachusetts, author of Bridging the Divide, My Life. One of the most painful parts of the book I was reading was you mentioned your military service during World War II. And frankly speaking, you had to fight just to fight. Tell us about that, if you could, a little bit about those experiences. I mean, some of those were very painful to read.
Well, Sheldon, first of all, I was assigned to the 366th Infantry Combat Regiment in Fort Devens, Massachusetts, and that fort was segregated, and there was flagrant segregation and discrimination there. They had different facilities for white soldiers, and they were superior facilities, and others for what was then I think called black soldiers. That nomenclature has changed, as you know, from colored to Negro to black to African American, which we use primarily today. But in those days, the armed forces of the United States were segregated all the way through, and we were like second-class soldiers. And a lot of their commanders did not believe that black soldiers were capable of fighting in a war. So you said fighting to fight. You're absolutely right. Our Negro papers or our black papers at that time, the Afro-American, the Tribune, and others, were campaigning vigorously in Washington to get us into combat, for which we had been trained.
Yeah, because most of you were, not to interrupt you, most of you were assigned to guarding bridges and Air Force bases.
Yes, that's all we were doing. We were protecting those bridges and trestles and Air Force bases, but never to actually into combat. And we didn't go into combat, so we did, and the 92nd Division actually went into combat as combat soldiers. So it was a difficult time for us, and here we're overseas fighting for freedom when we didn't have freedom ourselves, and things back home were, if not as bad as they were when we left, were worse than they were when we left, and worse when we returned home after the war was over.
And Sen Edward Brooke, even when you got into combat, it appears to me from reading your book that there was strategies designed to set you up to get killed by your commanders.
Well, we were almost like cannon fodder. They used strategies which, and I'd hate to really accuse them of it or indict them for it, but if you looked at it from a very practical point of view, that's exactly what they did. They had strategies which were destined to eliminate black soldiers, and we fought against that. We did all that we could possibly do to change that around, and thank God the war finally came to an end before we were all extinguished. But in my regiment alone, I think we lost something like certainly over 50% in casualties.
Unbelievable. But in a lot of ways, your service in the military, and your particular service in Italy, changed the course of your life, because that's where you met your wife, your first wife.
Yeah, that was part of it. I met a young lady really about 3 to 4 days, no, maybe a week, I guess, before I was stationed elsewhere, and eventually we were going over to the South Pacific and fight in that war against Japan. But then the bomb was dropped, and now orders were changed, and we were ordered to come home. So I didn't see very much of my first wife, but also changed my life because I was pre-med at Howard University, where I graduated. And with a Bachelor of Science degree, and doing court-martial work in the Army, both at Fort Devens and overseas. I came back and decided that I would not go for a medical degree, but I would go into the study of law, which I did, and I went back to Boston, went to Boston University Law School, and got my bachelor's degree and master's degree in law there, and became a practitioner of the law.
When you got involved in politics in Massachusetts, at first you were being endorsed by several different parties, and then you chose the Republican Party. How come you decided to go with the Republican Party at that particular point in time?
Sheldon, as you earlier said, my father, but also my mother, were Republicans. And Negroes at that time were mostly Republicans, because that was the party of Abraham Lincoln and the party of emancipation, and so minorities were primarily in the Republican Party, the Democratic Party was considered the party of segregation and discrimination, and particularly in the South, the Southern Democrats. And so my father deplored this, and he stayed in the Republican Party, and though we lived in Washington, he kept his residence in Virginia, and he and my mother voted always Republican in Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
I had never voted. Washington, D.C. did not enable you to vote. We didn't have the vote there then, and in many respects we don't have the vote now. For municipal city government, we were governed by a commissioner appointed by the president, and we had no mayor, no city council. We have that now, but we don't have a vote in the Congress. We have a delegate, and a very wonderful one, Eleanor Holmes Norton,
Yes.
who serves as a delegate, but she can speak, but she can't vote. And we just were able, most recently under her leadership, the House passed a bill which would give Washington, D.C. residents the right to vote for a voting member of the Congress in the House of Representatives. Its bill now goes to the Senate. We hope it will pass the Senate and hope it will be soon. The president has threatened a veto. We hope we can turn him around and change his mind, because this is only the fair and equitable thing to do. And it's a disgrace that in the nation's capital that they cannot vote in an election which would cover the House of Representatives or possibly in the future the United States Senate as well.
In the 50s and early 60s, when you were active in politics, etc., it seemed like at that time, for you in particular, the Republican Party was much more welcoming to you or African Americans, and ironically, than the Democratic Party, which in Massachusetts, even though Massachusetts, of course, then and now has a liberal reputation, it seemed to be much more welcoming to you for public office.
Well, not only to me, the Republican Party in Massachusetts was a more moderate party. It was the party of Cabot Lodge and Saltonstall and something witty, and some really moderate Republicans, and that was true in the national levels to some extent as well. Whereas the Democratic Party in Massachusetts did not follow the Republican leadership in the anti-segregation of the National Guards and things of that nature, which were sponsored by the Republican Party. It was the Republican Party, really, that took the leadership against McCarthy, and not the Democrats. They supported him in many ways. So I felt very comfortable with the party up there. But actually, Sheldon, I ran on both tickets because I didn't know about either parties not having had the opportunity in Washington. And they allowed that at that time. And I won the Republican nomination and barely lost the Democratic nomination, and therefore went on to become a Republican. But the Democrats, strangely enough, never nominated an African American for statewide office until the one who presently holds the position of governor, that's Deval Patrick, who was elected governor of Massachusetts. He is a Democrat, but he's the first one to even get the nomination in the Democratic Party, and that only happened in 2006. Think about that in the history of the state.
It's very interesting. Now, you first was elected to public office in Massachusetts in 1962 as Attorney General, and then I found the account of how you got the nomination just most fascinating. You fight with Elliot Richardson, and then you were reelected, and then you decided to run for the U.S. Senate in 1966, a pivotal year. If you could explain a little bit about that race for the U.S. Senate, because I assume at that time, and reading all accounts, the eyes of the nation were all on you as you ran for that office.
Well, actually, when I was elected Attorney General of Massachusetts, that was the first time, as historians tell me, in the history of the country that a black or African American had ever been elected Attorney General from any state in the nation. And I assembled some of the most wonderful men and women who served as assistant attorneys general and in other positions, and we were able to do a lot of good and save the state a lot, millions and millions and millions of dollars, and we fought corruption in the state, which was also blatant at that time. And so when Senator Saltonstall decided to step down and not run for another term, there were many who wanted to run for that position, but at that time I had a very strong, if I may say so, very strong political organization, and a lot of it was due to our record as Attorney General. And so I just said, look, I'm going to run for the United States Senate. Well, nobody believed that at the time that it could have been elected in a state where the black population was less than 2%. And that was also true when I ran for Attorney General. And I said, look, I've been elected Attorney General. The state is colorblind. I'm going to go on and just run on my merits. I'm not asking them to vote for me because I'm black, but I'm asking them not to vote for me. I don't want them to vote against me because I'm black either. So we went on and we ran against our governor, Endicott Peabody, and we won that election. And I was reelected in 1972. I think it's the first time also that any African American has been reelected to the Senate.
You know, last year I interviewed Lawrence Orris Graham, who wrote a book about Blanche Bruce, who was the senator back in a fascinating book about his life, etc. And some of the racism that he encountered, the nasty racism. He couldn't even go back to his home state of Mississippi. I just want to know, in the various offices that you ran for Secretary of State. You were the chairman of the Finance Commission of Boston. Earlier on, you run for a seat in the Massachusetts House of Representatives, and of course, Attorney General and Senate. Did you ever experience any overt racism from people? Because you're a prominent black person in a vastly majority white state.
Yeah, let me go back just a little bit, Sheldon, on that. You talked about Blanche Bruce, Blanche Kelso Bruce.
Yes.
He was elected in 1875, and he actually did serve a full term. He was not reelected.
Right.
He had all kinds of difficulties. He might be called the Jackie Robinson of the Senate. Hiram Revels, who was the first one African American to be elected. Both of these were elected by carpetbagger legislatures, not by popular vote, because no senator was elected by popular vote until the passage of the 17th Amendment back in 1913. Hiram Revels only served about a year, and he spent most of that year fighting to try to keep his seat and be recognized. So it was a terrible, terrible situation for them. Bruce, of course, at least had an opportunity to vote and to make service, and both of them were excellent, fine men, as a matter of fact. But it took almost 100 years after Blanche Bruce's service in the Senate before another black, and that was my election in 1966 to the Senate. Did I encounter overt racism?
Yes.
Answer is no. I joke about being the only African American to sit in the barber's chair in the Senate and not behind it. But I used all the facilities. I went down there saying, look, I'm a duly elected United States Senator from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I'm going to represent the people of Massachusetts, but the people of the nation as well, particularly my own race that had no representation, and other minorities as well, Native Americans, Hispanics, and whatnot. So it was a pretty tough role at that time. But did I experience overt racism? No. Was it there? I'm sure it was. Some of them were cool. Some of them were warm. Some eventually ended up calling me Ed, and I calling them by their first name. Some continued to be very formal throughout the two terms that I served in the Senate, but nothing that I could point to would indicate that they were prepared to do anything that would be, I would feel, reprehensible.
Yes.
My vote was just as good as their vote, just as strong as their vote. My authority and my power, such as it was as strong as theirs. There were 100 people there, and they all had equal power in their vote. In influence, that's a different thing, because the Senate is seniority, so those who had been there for a longer time had more powerful committee positions. But I rose to getting some of that myself by being the ranking Republican member of the various committees.
We're talking with former Senator Edward Brooke of Massachusetts, Republican from Massachusetts, the first popularly elected African American to the Senate in 1966, first since Reconstruction, author of Bridging the Divide, his memoir, My Life, Bridging the Divide. You were sworn in on the same day. I mean, you served in a very turbulent period of American history. You were sworn in on the same day that Adam Clayton Powell, the representative from Harlem, the great representative from Harlem, was being drummed out of the House. And that must have been a fascinating day. Indeed.
Well, that was fascinating in some respects, tragic in others. Adam Clayton Powell really was the one who sort of set the pace, set the goals. He was a path finder and leader, and he performed great services for African American people, not only those in his district in New York, but throughout the country. And I had great admiration for him, so it was sad for me to see that he was going through this. As you know, he was almost tried, and they were never successful in convicting him of the commission of any crime or anything of that nature. But they did muster sufficient votes to get him to step down. And as you say, on the day I was being sworn in, he was leaving, and so it was sort of ironic, and it sort of dampened my spirits because I would have liked to have had it the other way.
Did you ever have a chance to interact with him on any occasion?
Yes, well, not officially, obviously, because I was just being sworn in when he was leaving. Right. But I knew him personally, yes. I had met him on several different occasions. Okay. And I respected him and his father, the great preacher from Abyssinia Church in New York.
Yes. What was your relation like with the other senator, the senior senator from Massachusetts, Ted Kennedy?
Well, Ted Kennedy was very young. He had been the assistant district attorney in Suffolk County in Massachusetts, appointed by the district attorney, and then when his brother was assassinated, he went to the Senate, and then he subsequently defeated Henry Cabot Lodge's son, George Lodge. Yes. For the Senate. But he was young, a bit inarticulate at the time, lacking a bit in self-confidence, and God knows I guess you would lack in anything if you had all the tragedies that he had to suffer, and the entire Kennedy family had to suffer. Sure. And I think that they thought of him as being president of the United States, and I think he thought about it very seriously. And then he had his tragic problems as well. Of course. And after that, I think, as I say in Bridging the Divide, I think Ted, when he saw that the presidency was not going to be available to him, he determined to be the best senator he could possibly be, and I think he has. He is the undisputed leader, I think, on social legislation and civil liberties and civil rights, and I admire him for him and respect him for him.
Well, I want to get to a number of things before we leave, and there's a number of things I want to get to here. Of course, you just for the audience's sake, you were on the first. You were, of course, you served for 12 years. You were reelected in 1972. You were there during the very turbulent times of the 60s. As a Republican, I read in the book that you, at one point, even though you were Republican and you weren't considered if you will, a radical in some ways, you did meet with H. Rap Brown at one point, an extraordinary meeting, who was the black activist at that time. Could you tell us briefly about that? That was it seemed to have been a fascinating meeting. You met him here in Harlem, I believe, right?
Yes. Well, Rap Brown invited me to meet with him, asked me if I would come to New York and meet with him and some of his, a few, not a big number, but a few of his followers. And we did meet in Harlem. And my advisors, of course, had cautioned me, and many of them didn't want me to accept his invitation, but I insisted that I would, and I did. Mm-hmm. And I would say he personally was somewhat cordial. They said, you're not black because you're a member of the Senate. You're part of the system. Mm-hmm. And I said, being black means that I can't be a member of the United States Senate. I think that's what we want. We want to be in a seat of power. We want to be able to get better housing mm-hmm. and education and jobs and all the things that we lack. We are best to be then in the seat of power and in the United States Senate. Well, we went back and forth on these kinds of issues, and they never threatened me with any bodily harm or not. Some of the questions were I thought, very appropriate. Mm-hmm. Some of them were not. You got the usual language that you get in the meetings. Sure. But all in the main, I thought it was a good meeting. And mm-hmm. I don't mean by that I changed any of their minds or their thoughts or their heart. Mm-hmm. And of course, they didn't change mine. Right. And so we left on, I would say, a polite, cordial manner, mm-hmm. and that was it. But it was quite an experience. I don't think I learned a lot because I knew what they stood for, and mm-hmm. I knew why they had he had his own constituency, mm-hmm. and he was an activist, mm-hmm. and he was doing what he thought was right. I was doing what I thought was right. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, he ended up in jail. Yeah. And fortunately, I stayed in the Senate. Yeah. Let me ask you this. Actually, it was a very painful period in your life. When your attempted re-election in 1978, and I vaguely remember that too because I was following politics a little bit at that time. You lost your election to the late Senator Paul Tsongas, the Democrat from Massachusetts who served in the Senate and later ran for president. It seems like your very public and bitter divorce cost you that seat. Do you feel that was the case? I think it was a part of it. It certainly contributed to it. It was a very, very private matter. I could not speak out against my wife or my daughters. Mm-hmm. I never did. I didn't do it then during those painful months, and I haven't done it since, and I never shall. But without getting into that, there were other problems that I had. My position on abortion, I took a leadership role in the Senate on the woman's right to choose. Finally had to compromise with Hyde on language which I had created, like for the life of the mother, safety, etc. Those thoughts, the Panama Canal, which was a big issue at that time in my party, and I voted for the treaties with Jimmy Carter, who was our president at the time. Yes, which was against my party, but I voted for the treaties. I voted then for them. I'm glad that I did. Mm-hmm. I would do the same thing today, and I think history's proved that to be true. Yes. There were many other issues that time will not permit Sheldon to go into all of them, but I took a strong position on many issues which were were not in keeping with the then Republican Party, the party that was beginning to be the Goldwater Party, and party which was beginning to accept the Southern strategy, which I opposed so strongly.
Mm-hmm.
So you add all that up, I was losing my base support in the Republican Party as well, and of course it's a Democratic state. Then you throw in the unfortunate and painful divorce proceedings, which I have my thoughts about, but I think you've got to consider all of those as a factor, and the fact that the state, again, was overwhelmingly at that time Democratic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it came home to haunt me, and unfortunately for me at least, and for some others, I lost my seat for election to a third term.
Mm-hmm. I want to discuss a little bit about modern politics these days, and again, you are, there's no question about it, a trailblazer for many people, particularly African Americans. It is a sad fact of life, the fact that you were the first elected since Reconstruction, U.S. Senator, and then there's only been two more elected since then. Most prominently recently is Barack Obama, who has become somewhat of a rock star in American politics, only the third senator, black American, since Reconstruction. He's running for president at the time. At this time, he's doing very well in the polls and the fundraising. I know he's on the opposite side of the political aisle, but what are your thoughts about Barack Obama?
Well, I have never met him. I've talked to him on the phone. I called him to congratulate him. You're absolutely right. He's the fifth. We've only had five African Americans to serve in the United States Senate in the history of this country. Mm-hmm. And he is the fifth one. And as I said, not officially meeting him, but talking with him, I obviously was very, very much impressed. Strange you should ask. I just got a copy of his latest book, which he sent me. Mm-hmm. And he said, and I've memorized it because it impressed me so, he said to Senator Brooke, "Thanks for having cleared the path for me and so many others," and signed it Barack Obama, which was a very kind and generous inscription for him to write in his book.
It's also true, too.
Well, I'll leave history to decide that. Thank you, Sheldon, for your vote.
Yeah, and absolutely, no question about that.
But I thought it was a nice gesture on his part. As I said, I don't know him. I like you. I read about him and I hear about him, and of course, you're in the media, so you see even more than I do. And it's been almost a spectacular sort of rise, considering the fact that he's relatively new certainly in national politics, though he did serve for I think about 6-7 years in his state legislature in Illinois, in the state Senate. And you say, well, does he have the experience? Is he qualified? Well, I never like to compare with the worst, but there have been many presidents that we've had in this country who've had less experience than he, and certainly less qualified. So far academically, he's really so far ahead of the other candidates. There's no question about that. They'll be on him on experience, and of course that's for the electorate to make a decision. But so far, all I've known about him and read about him is positive, and I think it's good that he's running. I thought it was good that Jesse Jackson ran for president, and my old friend Shirley Chisholm, remember her from New York, the congresswoman, she dared to step out and run for president, and Al Sharpton. Yes. Some people laugh about them and they say this and that about them, but they serve a purpose by running even, because it gets the electorate thinking about and seeing people, African Americans, in that role. Had I not run for Secretary of State, though unsuccessfully, I don't think I would have ever been able to run for Attorney General and win.
Yes, yes.
Winning that, I would never have been able to have. If not winning that, I would never have the strength to run for political strength to run and be successful for the United States Senate.
Do you think he has a reasonable chance of getting the nomination?
Oh, I think no question about that. I think he has a very reasonable chance. I mean, you look at the competition, and then you look at him. I think he's got. I think he's got an excellent chance to win the Democratic nomination. You know, as you said earlier, he's raised more money, I guess, than most all of them, and that seemed to be a big factor. But you know, I don't want to see this race come down to a battle between, or the election of between a white female and a black male. We ought to be looking for the best person we can get, regardless of sex or race, because the country and the world are going through perhaps the most troublesome, dangerous times in the history of the world. So we've got to get the best person elected president, because we are still the most powerful nation on earth, economically, militarily, and of course we've made a lot of mistakes in this Iraq war.
Yes.
And I have been critical of it from the very, very beginning, even before the beginning of it, and I'm still critical of it. But you know, we've got to get this behind us, and we've got to get our soldiers out of there. We've got to have a foreign policy which is more likely to succeed in the Middle East, and with Israel and Palestine still having its problems, we've got to lend our power and our influence to help resolve that as well. So we've got a lot of things to do. So I think our choice this election will be the most important choice that we have been called upon to make in this generations and for generations to come.
Yeah, that's a question I want to ask you about. You know, you are your brand of republicanism, liberal, moderate, if you will, republicanism. Frankly, as you clearly know, is almost extinct in the Republican Party at the present time. And the conservative ascendancy with the Reagan administration, et cetera, went on, and there's just very few moderate Republicans left in the Republican Party. I mean, if you were serving now, who would you align yourself with in the Republican Party? I mean, in terms of other senators and positions, et cetera.
Well, I'd have to stop and think about that. And that itself is a bad answer. Shelton, you know, you say I'm a Republican, and I am, and I'm not going to leave the Republican Party. I think that's where I'm most needed, and others are most needed, because we need a vital two-party system of government. We need someone to mind the source. We need the debates, the programs, the issues, the policies that result from a strong two-party system of government. I think my party has gone too far to the right. I think it should be more moderate. I think the country is centrist, and we should have more centrism in our party policies. I think my party should abandon, if whether they have it, whether they admit they have it or not, the Southern strategy. I think we should not be appealing to the worst instincts in man and woman by a Southern strategy. I think that we ought to be a party that can compromise with the Democrats, and they with us, in getting the best legislation we can on immigration, on jobs, on minimum wage, on health care, all of those issues which affect all people, and we ought to get rid of racism in this country and in this world. Now, that's a big, big order.
Yes.
But I don't think you do that if you only have one party in government, because power corrupts. As Lord Acton said, absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Yes.
And I don't want to see our country and our system of government be denied the benefits of a two-party system. As for any individual leaders, I'm sure there are those there who feel the same way. But a lot of Republicans, unfortunately, feel that in order to become a candidate for president, they first, of course, have got to win the Republican nomination, as the Democrats have to win the Democratic nomination. And they feel that they can't win that Republican nomination unless they give in to some of the issues that the Republican Party has adopted and their platform that adopted, which does include, if not the entirety, certainly strong remnants of the Southern Southern strategy. And that's where we are in the party today.
Did you ever feel lonely as a black man in the Republican Party? You were kind of out there somewhat by yourself. I mean, you had a lot of supporters. Obviously, you were elected, but did you feel alone?
Well, Sean, that's funny. I used to say I could have my caucus in the telephone booth because there was only one of us there. Strangely enough, not strangely enough, I'm sure there's many reasons for it. But when I went to the Senate, there was one woman, Margaret Chase Smith from Maine, a Republican, and I was the only black in the Senate. Now there are 14 women senators. There's still only one black in the Senate.
Right.
So everyone who's been there has been in a lonely position. The answer is yes and no. I guess there's a bit of a maverick in my nature. I've never felt that if I believed I was right, then I don't care if I was the only one right. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I hear you.
And that's been my philosophy in life. My mother instilled that in me. You don't. And my father said, "Don't follow the crowd. You do what you think is right." We tried to train you to know right from wrong. If you do what you think is right, you stick to it, no matter if no one joins you. Well, that's the way I did it in the Senate. That's the way I did it throughout my political life, and that's the way I do it now.
All right. My final question for you, Senator Brooke, and it's a pleasure having you here with us. As you assess your life and this book in particular, what would you think your contribution is to the nation, and what would you like people to remember you by?
That's always the question, and always one that politicians particularly don't like to answer, because there's so many different things that you do in your lifetime that to choose one is really unfair to the others. I would like people to remember me as just what I said to you earlier, that there was a man who believed what he said and said what he believed. There is a man who we think had the wisdom and the strength and the courage to make the right decisions and take the right actions.
Well said, sir. Listen, it's an honor talking with you. I admired you for many years, and obviously many people have in your public life. And as Barack Obama said, as a trailblazer, and path blazing a path for him and many other politicians, particularly African American politicians, and to serve in public life and to put yourself out there in front of the voters to be accountable. And so I appreciate your time with us this morning to share your life, and particularly your book. Your book is called Bridging the Divide, My Life, by Sen Edward Brooke, published by Rutgers University Press. Sir, it's a pleasure sharing your time. Thank you for sharing your morning with us, and I wish you the best of health. We didn't even touch on that issue, but I certainly wish you all the best, sir.
Thank you, Sheldon. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Okay, thank you, sir, and good luck.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. And you've been listening to an interview I did with former Republican Senator from the state of Massachusetts, Edward W. Brooke, the first African-American to serve in the U.S. Senate when he was elected in 1966 since Reconstruction, and one of only five African-Americans to serve in the U.S. Senate in the history of our country. His book is called Bridging the Divide, My Life, by Senator Edward W. Brooke. It was a real honor to speak with him and discuss his life, one of my personal political heroes, and I'm sure one that is admired by many Americans as well. Shelton Walden here. Walden's Pond is the program, and we are here every Sunday, 1 to 2 o'clock here on WBAI 99.5 FM in New York, discussing health, culture, and politics, and so much more. We'll be back on July 1st after a couple weeks break. There's some special programs coming up over the next couple weeks, so we will not be here, but stay tuned to us back here on July 1st, God willing. Stay tuned next for a special edition of the Barrio Block. Today is a great parade going on Fifth Avenue this afternoon, so I'm sure they'll have a commentary about that, the Puerto Rican Day Parade, and music, of course, to share your afternoon with. So until July 1st, we'll be back with another edition of Walden's Pond. Peace and blessings to all of you, and have a great rest of the afternoon. Take care.